Hello and welcome to Big Ideas. We are here today with Antara Vasudev, CEO and founder of Civis. In this episode, we will discuss the need and challenges of pre-legislative consultation in India. It is an idea that both Antara and Civis have been working towards over the past 7 to 8 years. They enable people to give feedback on draft laws and policies so as to help in building a more representative, deliberative, and transparent democracy. They also encourage government ministries, departments, and policymakers to adopt a more consultation-based approach towards the lawmaking process. Welcome, Antara. Glad to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Pavitra. It's such a pleasure to be on Big Ideas, and I'm really excited for our conversation today.
I'm glad to. So, Antara, to start us off, I want to get into the need of having a pre-legislative consultation process for India. And India was designed to be a representative democracy, as in people would elect representatives and they would deliberate and formulate laws as opposed to citizens directly participating in the lawmaking process. And the Constitution too, when it lays out the process of making laws, does not mandate for a consultation process. In that context, why this shift towards a more consultation, public participation towards the lawmaking process? How did this shift happen and what is the need for the shift?
Thanks, Pavitra, for that really interesting question. I think I want to touch upon a couple of things that you mentioned in the question itself, right? One is that very interestingly, while the Constitution itself doesn't mention consultation, the entire process of formation of the Constitution was very consultative by nature, right? In fact, we had people who made representations, individuals, religious groups, lawyers, other people who were invested in what India should look like. Oftentimes, those feedback points and those suggestions came in as unsolicited. But because there was so much public interest in shaping the Constitution beyond the Constituent Assembly, they actually created a provision for accepting and responding to those suggestions and inputs that actually came in. So while there's no explicit mention of it, it's really interesting to see that this culture of deliberation has been a part of our democracy for a very, very long time. That's the Indian context. But I think broadly, what you touched upon again is that we have a representative democracy, and why do we need to move towards more citizen and civic participation? There, I think there are a couple of things that I personally find really interesting, which are more recent trends as well that have come up. One of these trends is the fact that today we have different forms of communication, right? So I'll go into a little bit of theory here, but essentially, if you look at the history of civic technology and citizens' participation, it was first revolutionized in a very big way by the printing press, because all of a sudden you went from a more strict flow of information to a more free flow of information, right? With the advent of the internet, social media, and all of those things, what we see now is that now it's a two-way form of communication. So it's not just one way that you print out something and you distribute it across the board and everybody either follows or doesn't follow the diktat, right? There is a lot more participation and tools that have been built for that. So if we just look at Twitter, for example, or Facebook, or what they have brought about is a two-way form of communication, especially amongst younger folk. UNICEF and other bodies have found that their expectation is to engage with governments in the same way. Right. And naturally, if everything in your world works in such a way that you can at the click of a button avail something, or at the click of a button get a ride to go somewhere, your expectation would naturally grow of governments to be able to support that kind of responsiveness as well.
Right.
Right. And the interesting part in that is that there are different forms in which you can do it. Grievance redressal is one of them, right? But beyond grievance redressal, consultations we have found is another way in which governments can actually engage citizens, and citizens can make the most of that kind of a collaboration. I'll touch upon now the part of the representative democracy that you spoke about, right? Because there is often the misnomer that consultation means direct or direct democracy, right? Which it's very much not. The idea behind consultation is that the policymaker, the person we have elected, has a particular perspective or has a particular policy that they want to put out. Through consultation, what we're able to do is actually enhance that policy, make it better, make it easier and quicker to implement, and also make it more cost effective for governments. So we're solving for some of the more tactical pieces of policy implementation by conducting consultations.
Right. As opposed to just putting out a policy and then facing a whole social unrest against it, you might as well get the citizen feedback upfront. So in that line, I want to discuss some of the apparent challenges that exist to the consultation process. Of course, some of the ones are exactly the ones you have been trying to solve, creating a platform for this engagement, making sure one on the government side, they put up these policies well ahead in time, and that the citizens are fed enough information about it, the knowledge is there, and also the knowledge that they can actually participate in the process. So these are some questions you have been trying to solve and might I say have been successfully solving. But some of the more latent challenges, such as what happens when there is extreme participation from one set of interest group, right? Policy capture, or just some disengagement from the public because they are fatigued multiple times. They have provided their feedback and they don't really see it influencing the policy in any way. How have you been thinking about these problems? And second part of the challenges is also that the stage at which right now the pre-legislative consultation happens, or how the policy works out it to be, also is more on fixing the design of the law, provisions of the law, as opposed to trying to attempt to fix the rationale or the purpose of the law, which could be flawed as well. We've seen instances of protests for CAA or the farm bills in that sense. How have you been thinking about these problems?
Right. So, thank you so much. Let's maybe start with fatigue, then go to policy capture, and then come to the rest. I think a citizen's fatigue is warranted, but I think also what differs is how you approach the citizen. So are we saying that Pavitra has to respond to every single policy that comes up for public consultation? No. Because to be honest, you'll have a realm of lived experience, right? And it's only the lived experience that you can give governments, which is seen as being valuable. I can share a few examples as well as we continue to chat. But the idea is that it's not that every citizen needs to respond to every law, but it's a citizen who is impacted and most closely impacted should have the opportunity to respond to that law. And I think in many ways, Civis's vision is just to do that. So that's the reason why we not only aggregate all the draft laws that are open for consultation, we simplify them, but we also focus very specifically around outreach. In terms of, if you are somebody who comes from a rural part of Rajasthan, how can technology and other tools make it easy for your participation on a Rajasthan-specific bill, right? So there is a way in which you can actually look at that more closely and segment how you're reaching out to citizens and ensure that you have the relevance factor, which is the most important really from the lawmaker's perspective as well. It goes to such an extent that Taiwan does a beautiful job of this. Their former Minister of Digital Affairs, Audrey Tang, is a veritable expert in this field. And what Audrey Tang has been able to do is make sure that every citizen in Taiwan gets an SMS every time a law is open for consultation, right? Now, once you have that kind of reach, and that kind of awareness about consultation as a participatory mechanism, as something that citizens and governments both want, then you can start doing sampling, segmentation, and other pieces of it. So in Taiwan today, while there is a channel of information, there are special groups that are selected based on certain parameters by the government to comment on, to share feedback on certain policies, right? And that's a randomized sampling approach that they have across citizens of the country. So the idea there is that there is a process of evolution that you can have, and there are different ways in which the methodology could evolve. Now, in a lot of the countries like America, for example, where consultation has been around since the Administrative Procedure Act of 1946 or something, if I'm not wrong, their challenges are different. Our challenges in India are very, very different. And that kind of brings me to your point of policy capture as well, right? While there is, again, a sort of possibility that there could be policy capture if you have too many representations from a particular interest group, I do want to assure everybody that we work in a country with very, very seasoned policymakers who are especially susceptible and keep their eyes out for vested interest.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those pet peeves that perhaps are there, and people always have a way of looking out for it, right? It brings me back to the fact that direct referendum is not the idea. Right. While we may actually share feedback and maybe a lot of feedback from one particular point of view, governments are able to see that and categorize it as a particular point of view, right? In the way that it's done, actually, you'll see that all of the feedback gets attached to one clause. No matter how voluminous it might be, or how much feedback might have come for one point, at the end of the day, when the government is reviewing that feedback, it's looked at one point of feedback on one particular clause of the law, right? So it's not... I don't worry too much about policy capture for that reason. And also because I do want to kind of go to the underlying message of what we're trying to do through consultation, right? Consultation is very much a means to an end. And that end is building greater citizen and government trust, right? Now, trust is a sort of very broad word. How do you define it? How do you quantify it? The way that I like to think about it is that our aim is to build procedural trust. Right? So it might be the case that my input is not taken into account. And that doesn't mean that I get enchanted by the system, right? Not disenfranchised, disenchanted by the system. What it means is that as long as I know that every step of the process was transparent, it was something that took me into consideration, that was open, and I could actually see the inputs and outputs in that particular situation, I might have more trust for that system. It's not so much to say that we are trying to it's not so much to say that we're trying to make sure that public consultation is the only way we deliberate. As time goes on, there'll be newer and newer ways of doing that. But what we're trying to zero in on is building that public trust in institutions, and specifically around procedures.
So, what about the capacity at the government to actually evaluate the responses that comes their way? And most of the time, there is a time crunch even when the laws are moving from a bill to a law. So, how have you been helping? Have you been helping the government with this sort of consolidating the responses? And how does this work across different government bodies?
Right. So that's a really interesting question. And there are, unfortunately, a lot of capacity constraints on that front. Civis' solution to it has been to build tools that help with response aggregation and clustering. And now I think with the advent of Gen AI, we have different ways to be able to do that. So we are building tools to be able to build government capacity to at least analyze feedback at scale. We've heard from a lot of officers that, it's a very overwhelming and daunting task. And understandably, right? Because when we were trying to solve for it ourselves, we realized that how do you even create an OCR readable PDF from a letter that somebody has written in
Hmm.
response to a consultation document. It's tremendously difficult. What the government is currently doing is relying a lot on different kinds of processes, but in our experience, we've seen it's mostly manual. So you not just aggregate, you print out all your emails, you print out all the letters that you have gotten, you take copies of everything, you make a big folder, then based on that folder, you go through everything, you highlight it, you make an Excel sheet, and you say, okay, in this clause this, in this clause this, in this clause this, right? It's really tremendous to see the effort that they go through. And that again brings me to my point on procedural trust a little bit, because to you and me, none of this is visible.
Right.
To you and me, we feel like, what's the point? We gave our feedback, nothing happened, right? But the fact that it takes like 3 years or a considerable amount of time for the law to come out, it really, in our experience, we've seen it's because those inputs are taken very, very, very closely. So there is a lot that can be done in that space. There's a lot of space for innovation as well. And I think that's one of the most exciting things about this domain right now, is that you have space to bring academic rigor, to bring best practices, and to really build out something from its very inception that is a strong and robust process.
Right. So, in your experience, what have been some instances where there was good feedback given on, like, there was success on both sides, where there was good feedback given and the public feedback actually found its way to the law and influenced the law? What worked in those success stories, and how can that help the future improvements in this whole pre-legislative consultation process?
Right. So, in the spirit of the big ideas, I think I'm going to give one financial market example and one non-financial. I'll start with the one which is a very recent development from the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. So, there they had made the rules for getting access to a disability identity card much more stringent. All right. What they had seen is that there were a lot of violations of people getting disability cards even when they didn't have any impairments, and they wanted to crack down on that. So, in the process, they started to make the rules of getting those identity cards a lot more stringent. Now, they put it out for public comment, and a number of different organizations and individuals contributed and said, this won't work for certain reasons. It would have tangibly made it much harder for people with visual impairments, actual impairments, to be able to access the identity card and the entitled benefits. Right? It was really heartening to see that within just a couple of months, maybe 3 or 4 from the consultation, the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment actually put a pause. And they said, because of stakeholder input, we have realized that this is not feasible. So we are not going to go ahead with this change. We're reverting back to the old system, which was working just fine. And instead, we'll see how we can be more stringent against people who are misusing the system. Right? That's huge. At a very tangible level, if you look at the impact that has on a nation full of individuals, right? That is something which is a really sea change. And the government was willing to make it. They were keen to kind of facilitate that through people's voice. And that is something that I think we really ought to celebrate, right? That's my non-financial market example. From the financial markets itself, I think I'll go back a couple of years to SEBI's regulations around green and blue bonds, right? Fantastic document that SEBI had put out. A lot of stakeholders came in and commented on that as well, not just from investors' perspective, but also from a retail investment perspective on what exactly a green and blue bond should have, what are the kinds of incentives it should create, what should it not support, maybe fuel and other things, other big areas which are problematic. It should not support projects of those areas, right? So really building out the contours of a green and blue bond from a perspective of a financial market expert, as well as from an investor, retail investor who would like to bring on those bonds, right? those regulations, the second iteration came out, I think, about 6 months. Again, credit to SEBI there. 6 months after the first legislation or regulation came out, and what we saw was 70+% of the feedback got accepted.
Right.
So that has now led to a much larger push for green and blue bonds. And in fact, even in the budget this year, there was a much bigger and stronger push for green and blue bonds because the framework has been co-created. Right. So now that brings me to your second point, which is what is it that worked? Right. And I feel like I think
because I would have thought it would have been more obvious in a financial market setup or laws that affect corporate bodies, they voicing out the grievances. But your first example on the disability bit, I think that was a really motivating and interesting story. So yeah, what worked?
Thanks, Pavitra. No, so I think there are a couple of things that really work. One is that to make the case, and I do want to share the beauty of individuals sharing their lived experiences, right? Because that's something that the government doesn't have access to. They wouldn't know what it would actually take for somebody with a visual impairment to fill an online form until and unless somebody with a visual impairment describes it, right? And you do tend to see then from that lived experience how the implementation is really going to be very, very difficult, right? So in my experience, if I were to distill it, it would be relevant feedback, which is focused on a greater public good, not just on this is going to be difficult for me per se. And it's also feedback which looks very closely at the implementation challenges of a particular law, rule, or policy.
Right.
Because ultimately, if you have a difficult to implement system, that's also a higher cost to government, right? So you need to, they have a mind, an eye out for that as well in terms of what cost savings it can provide. So if as a citizen, I come in and I give relevant feedback, which is public spirited and which is also something that can have a positive impact on the implementation of that particular rule, law, policy, in most cases, we've seen it be accepted. It's really just a challenge of time because it means that entire lawmaking cycle will go on for 2,500 days or whatever it takes. And in that entire time, we just have to be patient and see, is it getting accepted? Is it not? Which is an unnerving process as well. But it happens, is my experience.
No, but as you said, the main idea or the key is that you help the citizens understand that there is a process. Firstly, you can voice out if there is a grievance towards what the law is, how the law affects you. And second, that the process is transparent, it's actually reaching the people. So my final question is, how are we doing in this space today as a country, state governments, union governments? And since you've started this whole journey, I think 7 to 8 years back, do you see good improvements and where do you see us in the future?
Thanks, Pavitra, for that question. So, we're doing well. So I'll just classify what that means. I've never felt like a doctor before, but I feel like in this moment I'm doing a temperature check and telling somebody that, yeah, you're okay. But I think we are doing well for a couple of parameters. One is adoption. The amount of consultations that we have seen get adopted or come out for public feedback have actually gone up almost 2,000% since 2014, right? So it's a huge improvement. India's regulatory sector has had a very, very strong culture of consultation right from its get-go. And that is something that we can really be proud of as a country and really look upon as a local best practice, right? Because it's not something that is outside our context. Within our context, some people are doing a great job. And there is the possibility for other ministries and state governments to actually learn from, let's say, a CHAI or an IBBI or other regulators that have very strong consultative and very innovative consultative practices. When it comes to the ministry and state split, I think there is a little bit more complexity. We've seen that ministries are adhering to the pre-legislative consultation policy in great numbers. So ministries are doing a really, really good job. When it comes to state governments and urban local bodies specifically, the urban local body has a mandate only to consult on some things, right? And those are mostly master plans or really large policy documents. What we're seeing now, like in fact, like now until the 31st of May, in Bombay itself, the BMC has taken it upon itself to consult citizens on solid waste management bylaws. Right. So we also have these outlier examples where they're going beyond the mandate that the law prescribes just to make sure that they're able to implement something easily
Right.
and they're able to take the citizen along in that journey. Right. So that's the scenario with urban local bodies. With state governments, it's a little bit harder to say, mostly because we don't have an aggregated source of truth when it comes to who is publishing consultations and what else. Civis aims to do that, but we realize that our limitations also lie in terms of the languages, the state newspapers that we are receiving in our office and how we're passing through it. So I feel like there is a little bit of a gap in knowledge in terms of how many state governments are actively consulting, what kinds of things are they consulting on, and it wouldn't be fair to criticize on the basis that they're not doing it enough if I'm only looking from an English or Hindi perspective, right? So there are certain states like Tamil Nadu which consults all the time. There are states like Rajasthan as well. Maharashtra is also coming up in the game, who really do consult. But it's with the rest, it's a little bit of process and information, and actually being able to say with great confidence that we have all the information to be able to judge their performance, which right now we don't.
Right. And I think what I really picked up in what you said is that at least when there are compliance-based laws like solid waste management, this participation also sort of gives that you're taking the citizen along with you in the journey, and they're more likely to actually adhere to certain laws that's out there because they have participated in it. So thank you so much, Antara. This was great.
Thank you, Pavitra. It's been such a pleasure, and I'm really grateful to all the questions that you had for me today.
Thanks.
Thanks.